John mentioned, I am a former political science department faculty member at UCF, and it was great to come back and see my former colleagues. We were just discussing how little any of us have changed over the past 20 years. I'm going to pick up on some of Admiral Gunn's comments and extend them specifically into looking at the Navy, the issues relating to the Navy, and issues related to space. As John said, my area of research focus is on space security, and the relationship between space and climate change and globalization. Another area I work in is significant. Much of the data gathered regarding climate change is gathered through space assets, and one of the points I will raise is that just when we need the data the most, the opportunity to get it may be diminishing. The topic of this workshop is both timely and important. At the Naval War College, one of the responsibilities I have is to chair a working group on climate change and national security. Part of the work on that group is to assure information and discussion of related topics are included in the curriculum presented to our students. And our students are military officers and security practitioners, and they come to the Naval War College for a 10-month master's program. I will tell you from the start that the premise of climate change and the issues that will result is not challenged. We begin by accepting it as an issue, not by debating its veracity. Reflective of the American population at large, there are doubters. And one of my fears is that if nothing catastrophic happens in the next 5 to 10 years related to climate change will be dismissed as just another fad issue. That doesn't mean I'm hoping for a catastrophic event, just that I believe it is our responsibility to keep focused on the issues. It may be too late for prevention, so primarily mitigation issues, and we shouldn't be dissuaded by chiding that this is an issue for those wearing Birkenstocks rather than boots, or dissuaded by claims of distraction from the real issues regarding national security. Well, why do we start from presumption of an issue? Because numerous government, think tank, and military reports have identified threats, not questioning if these threats will occur, but rather attempting to assess how quickly and severely, and advocated urgent attention. It was a 2002 National Research Council report on abrupt climate change that spurred initial interest in climate change within the security community. While focused on the need for more data gathering, modeling, and science-related issues, its final recommendation extended beyond the scientific community, calling for no regrets measures to reduce vulnerabilities and increase adaptive capacity at little or no cost, under a premise of do no harm. That report caught the attention of Andrew Marshall at the Pentagon's Office of Net Assessment. That office, if you haven't heard of it, is known for its propensity and indeed mission to think outside the box. And they explored the exacerbation of already unstable geopolitical environments that could result from simultaneous global crises in food supplies, water availability, energy supplies, and severe weather events. The report noted that, quote, unlikely alliances could be formed as defense priorities shift, and the goal is resources for survival rather than religion, ideology, or national honor, unquote. Disputes, even wars over resources, are not new. Scholars like Michael Clare and others have made careers out of examining those issues. Examples of military campaigns being influenced, even determined by weather, are abundant as well. So what's different today? The military has spent decades preparing to fight ideological enemies with large standing armies. It knows how to do that very well. Challenges presented by climate change and related forces of nature, however, will produce a unique set of asymmetric threats for which we may or may not be prepared, creating vast new risks. Recognition of that risk has been recognized in, for example, think tank studies in 2007 from CNA, from the Center for Strategic and International Studies, CSIS, and the Council on Foreign Relations. Additionally, the Army War College sponsored a symposium in 2007, and its Strategic Studies Institute published the proceedings in May 2008. The National Intelligence Council conducted its own review, presented in testimony to Congress in 2008 as well. So reports abound, and I could spend all my allotted time reviewing the multitude of scientific and security studies that encourage action. Rather, however, I would like to instead focus your attention on two studies which I consider significant confirmation regarding the veracity of the problem. The first is a 2009 report co-sponsored by the International Institute of Strategic Studies and Lloyd's of London. The second report is a 2009 study by the Swiss insurance firm Swiss Reinsurance Company. Neither Lloyd's of London nor Swiss Reinsurance as businesses, as insurance businesses, have little interest in or tolerance for ideology. They are concerned with risk and money. Both reports begin with an assumption that climate change will have negative impacts which must be planned for, and these companies want to be prepared. Certainly, Florida is a state that can appreciate what a major weather event can have on the insurance industry. Business is not concerned with issues created by tree-hugging environmentalists or navel-gazing academics, and business is concerned with what they see as the clear negative ramifications of climate change. So on the basis of all of those, we at the Naval War College consider inclusion of climate change and related issues as imperative to include in our curriculum for consideration by our military officers and security practitioners who are our students. Well, what about the Navy? The 2007 Department of the Navy Cooperative Strategy for the 21st Century Sea Power, known as the Maritime Strategy, spoke of climate change in two places. The first, quote, climate change is gradually opening up the waters of the Arctic, not only to new resource development, but also to new shipping routes that may reshape the global transport system. While these developments offer opportunities for growth, they are potential sources of competition and conflict for access and natural resources, end quote. The second, and the one that I am most concerned with right now, is, quote, the effects of climate change may also amplify human suffering through catastrophic storms, loss of arable lands, and coastal flooding, could lead to loss of life, involuntary migration, social instability, and regional crises. The Naval War College held an Arctic conference in September 2009, just a couple months ago, focusing on circumpolar security and on military security. The Marine Policy Center at the Woods Hole Oceanographic Institute, which conducts research on climate change policy, co-sponsored that conference. The organizers are currently working with presenters in editing a bound volume of papers working on, which will be the really first contemporary volume to examine circumpolar Arctic military security. Also in September 2009, the National Academies began a 15-month project called National Security Implications of Climate Change on U.S. naval forces. So clearly there is much going on, much to talk about, and much action being taken. I would like to focus my remaining time on the human security issues likely incumbent with climate change and national security, and on the space assets potentially needed for both assessment and mitigation efforts. A 2008 report from Tufts University entitled The Humanitarian Costs of Climate Change succinctly states the human security problem. There it said, other than earthquake and tsunami events, all natural disasters are triggered by weather-related phenomenon. drought, floods, cyclones and high winds, and extreme heat and extreme cold events. Extreme events do not cause disasters. In fact, while we use the term natural disasters throughout the report, this term is misleading. Natural disasters are triggered by extreme natural phenomena and become disasters because of the vulnerability of the people and places where they occur. What currently constitute a disaster with appropriate preparedness and risk reduction efforts need not be a disaster in the future. An extreme weather event needs vulnerable people to act upon, people whose livelihood systems are insufficiently robust to withstand the extra shock. Thus, residents in London survived the severe flooding of 2000-2001 because of the Thames barrier and the payout from flood insurance and other livelihood adaptations. But most subsistence farmers on the Mekong Delta were less lucky, seeing most of their assets washed away, and with them, years' worth of building flood-resistant livelihoods. People's vulnerability to extreme natural events is a product of economics, politics, and location. But it is the climate and its daily projection as weather that provides the hazards that act upon the vulnerability. Between 1990 and 1998, more than 97% of all natural disaster-related deaths were in developing countries. What happens when a disaster strikes the developing countries? Well, many things, including the capacity of states to handle immediate issues. And if you include in your definition of states those within the United States, certainly Hurricane Katrina and the difficulties experienced by the city of New Orleans and the state of Louisiana come to mind. A colleague of mine has coined a new term, feral cities, when cities do not have the capacity to provide basic services to their populations. And by that definition, certainly New Orleans, for at least some period of time, falls into that category of feral cities. Additionally, they then experienced setbacks for longer-term growth. Hurricane Mitch, hitting Central America in 1998 as a Category 5 storm, basically wiped out many years of economic development and progress. The storm not only had immediate destructive effects, but also undermined much of the development infrastructure of Honduras. In the words of one U.S. official, what took decades to build was washed away in a few hours or days. When a major storm, possibly linked to climate change, hits a developing country, it can have a devastating effect not only on human security, but also on state capacity. Diminished state capacity is a characteristic of the kind of failed or failing states which are often petri dishes for terrorists or terrorist sympathizers, providing yet another climate change human security risks. At the Naval War College, one of my responsibilities, or actually an opportunity, is to participate on many of the engagement programs that the Naval War College is linked to other countries and their professional military education institutions. Over the past year, I've been to Cameroon, Ethiopia, Tanzania, Colombia, and a number of other countries. The desire of these countries for sustainable development the desire is there, but the fragility of their infrastructure is such that one weather-related event can have devastating effects on their ability to carry through. Problems caused by vulnerabilities can quickly become security threats to be mitigated by the U.S. military, as stated in the Maritime Strategy. Furthermore, there is a global expectation that the United States will be responsive during times of crisis. Recall that favorable global public opinion toward the United States took its sharpest turn upward since the U.S. invaded Iraq after the massive tsunami aid afforded by the U.S. military, because it had the resources and equipment after the 2004 earthquake tsunami disaster in Indonesia. The question then becomes, is the U.S. military preparing to be similarly responsive on a potentially unprecedented scale? And how does it do that? For the Navy, those questions are the subject of considerable research and effort by a myriad of often networked individuals at the professional military education institutions such as the Naval War College, the Naval Postgraduate School, MIT, Woods Hole, as well as think tanks and other government groups. The research is international as well. One of my faculty members, for example, is working with researchers at Pudong University in China, given the high percentage of natural disaster-related events occurring along the Pacific Rim. China is dramatically and significantly interested in climate change because they realized so much of their population lives in the coastal urban areas and how quickly they could become impacted. Another faculty member is working on transnational issues in coastal Africa, with potentially heightened issues by climate change-related events. Climate change is an inherently transnational problem, which requires both national and transnational mitigation efforts. Finally, part of the reason dealing with climate change has been kicked down the road to the point where prevention may no longer be an option, with naysayers still loudly belittling the issues and berating mitigation efforts, is that there is a wide range of impacts within varying time frames. The science of climate change is not exact, but it is science. My faculty works a lot with intelligence communities, and one of the categorizations we make with them concerns types of questions to be dealt with. We say there are two basic types of questions: puzzles and mysteries. Puzzles have answers. Eventually, puzzles have answers. How long does it take for a country to develop a nuclear weapon from a civil nuclear program? That's a puzzle. How many ships are needed to defend a harbor under particular circumstances? That's a puzzle with an answer. What will it take to eradicate a disease in a particular country? Again, a puzzle. With enough hard evidence, these questions can be answered. Mysteries, however, are not solved by evidence. Rather, speculation about answers can be drawn from clues. What would motivate a country to develop nuclear weapons? That's a mystery. Why did China launch an anti-satellite weapon in 2007? That's a mystery to which you can get lots of different answers. Under what circumstances might Iran give up its nuclear ambitions? Again, a mystery, not a puzzle. Because mysteries often involve considerations of intent, they are much harder to answer. Too often, though, we look at all questions through political or organizational prisms that conveniently allow those questions which can be answered by evidence from those which cannot. Climate change is a puzzle in that hard evidence regarding the already demonstrable effects exist from which predictions about the future can be made. But the very existence of a problem is treated as a mystery by some. Climate change naysayers regularly portray the scientific community as evenly split on climate change as a problem, which is a falsity. There is actually considerable consensus on a great deal of the climate change data, including what has occurred, with differences primarily focused on how fast and how extensive future impacts can be expected. That is the only mystery. The naysayer position suggests that unless there is unquestionable proof of imminent catastrophe, there is no real problem. While I do agree that more scientific data is needed for assessment and predictions and for mitigation later, there is no puzzle as to the problem. Ironically, however, funding for space assets that could provide the data is at risk of shrinking, both within the military and the civil sector due to other priorities and assumptions that other sources can be relied upon, thereby making the risk acceptable. Meteorological satellites offer just one example. The National Polar Operational Environmental Satellite System, NPOS program, exemplifies a good idea gone awry, resulting in lessened capabilities. The idea was simple. The Defense Department, NASA, and NOAA would work together to develop a state-of-the-art weather satellite system orbiting the poles for maximum Earth coverage, rather than operating parallel systems as they have in the past. Coordination. An integrated program office was created in 1994 with each of the three agencies to take the lead on one of the three primary function areas. But by 2006, Congress was lambasting NPOS as a program in crisis, citing soaring cost, schedules missed, technical difficulties, and the general inability of the participants to work together. A major program restructuring resulted in 2006-2007, restructuring that allowed partners to be less reliant on one another. In other words, if not getting a divorce, separation was certainly in the air. The problem with divorce is that you have to sell the big house and both parties downsize to small apartments. In the case of NPOS, the result will be fewer sensors and less overall capabilities. NASA commitments to climate change-related activity may well be contingent on funding, dependent on what the Obama administration decides to do, consequent to the report of the Augustine Commission, a commission concluding that either more money must be committed to carrying out current human spaceflight plans or the plans reconfigured to meet budget realities. More money for human spaceflight could well come, as it has in the past, by another slaughter of the innocence of science programs, as was done in the late 1970s, when space science programs were sacrificed to reprogram funds to the Space Shuttle program to literally get it off the ground. I've just come from a 2-day meeting in California of the National Academy of Science and Space Studies Board, and while many questions were left open when we departed, the one clarity we had was it is very unlikely there will be any significant increase for any NASA-related or NOAA-related space funding over the next 10 years. All this means there may be less data available from space at a time when it's needed most. So the question then becomes, what is to be done? Well, there are two things that we can state with some certainty. First, more and broader scenarios need to be developed and assessed for future force planning and training considerations by the military. For example, studies of potential sea level rise impacts have been conducted for most parts of the globe, and those that have been done typically examine only one aspect of sea level impacts, such as beach erosion or storm surge height. Other consequences, such as impacts on freshwater supplies, infrastructure, or agricultural damage, and temporary or permanent displacement of coastal populations, need to be considered as well. Certainly, some island countries in the South Pacific are already looking at this, negotiating with countries like Australia for permanent population resettlement. Second, once there is a better understanding of impacts, capabilities to address the impacts must be incorporated into future force planning. That will mean difficult, resource-constrained decisions. In terms of space assets, the stovepiping of space activities that has prevailed in the United States due to the dual-use nature of space assets must be reconsidered and coordinated, as suggested in the recent National Academy of Sciences report on America's Future in Space, also known as the Lyles Commission, on which I was honored to serve. America's space programs must be coordinated to act as one toward furthering America's strategic goals. In conclusion, addressing the challenges of climate change is a national security imperative ignored at our peril. We must not be dissuaded or discouraged. I'm pleased to be working at an institution and for an organization already committed to being part of the solution rather than the problem, and I'm very pleased to have had the opportunity to speak with you as part of your program, which focuses on this issue as well. Thank you.